Hello everyone, welcome to video lectures and ISR initiative by Shivananda Sharma Memorial RB College. In this connection, Neetha SS of Department of Computer Applications has posted a video on the subject DBMS and the topic transaction processing. Please watch the video till the end and like, share with your peer groups and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you. We'll discuss about transaction processing concepts. So what is transaction? A transaction is the basic logical unit of execution in an information system. It is a sequence of operations that must be executed as a whole, taking a consistent database state into another consistent database state. That means it's a unit of program execution that accesses and possibly modifies various data objects, that is tuples and relations. A transaction, whenever you are doing any transaction in database, will be doing a sequence of operations. Okay, whenever we are doing certain operations, it should not affect the other database state. So that's why we have to maintain a consistent from one database state into another consistent database state. This we call it as a transaction. Example, suppose an employee of bank transfers rupees 800 from X account to Y's account. So what is this, the transaction takes place? So we have several tasks, that is low level task, which will be happening. Whenever you want to transfer certain amount, what we should do? Consider there is an X account. First we have to open an account. So that is why open account X. Then old balance, that is X dot balance. New balance, old balance minus 800. Whenever you are transferring an amount, it should be deducted from your old balance. And then you have to check your new balance, that should be updated properly. Now close account of X. Once this transaction is completed, you have to check the other account detail, whether to whom you have transferred, it is correctly debited or credited to him or not. Now consider this Y's account, open account Y, old balance, what is the old balance of Y, new balance, what he should have? He should have old balance plus 800 rupees what you have credited to him, and new balance should be updated with this amount. Then close account of Y. This is a simple example for the transaction in the database. So whenever we are transferring any amount in the bank account, it should be properly updated and it should not change any consistency in the database state. So this we call it as the transaction. What are the important properties of transaction? So we have four important properties, that is atomicity, consistency, isolation and durability. We also call it as asset properties. Okay. So what is atomicity? This property states that a transaction is an atomic unit of processing, that is either it is performed in its entirely or not performed at all. There should not be any partial updates whenever you are doing any transaction. We call it as atomicity. Consistency. A successful execution of a transaction must take a consistent database state to a new consistent database state. Okay. A transaction should take the database from one consistent state to another consistent state. It should not have any adverse effect on any data item in the database. Next is isolation. A transaction should be executed as if it is the only one in the system. There should not be any interference from the other concurrent transactions that are simultaneously running. So isolation means a transaction must not make its modifications visible to other transaction until it is committed. Each transaction is unaware of other transactions executing concurrently in the system. That is concurrency control. So isolation means what? So whenever you are doing any transaction, until you commit for that transaction, others should not be able to see the modifications whatever you are doing in the transaction, is known as isolation. So your system will be having concurrency control. Next, durability. If a committed transaction brings about a change, that change should be durable in the database and not lost in any case of any failure. That means if once transaction has committed to its changes, these changes must never get lost due to subsequent, that is, system failures. Next, we have an important concept, that is transaction states. The various states of database transactions are listed here. So one is active, that is begin transaction. After active, we have partially committed, committed, failed, terminated. We'll explain one by one what is these transaction states. Okay. So once a transaction states execution, it becomes active. It can issue read or write operation. Once this read or write operations completes the transaction, it becomes the partially committed state. Next, some recovery protocols needs to ensure that a system failure will not result in an inability to record changes in the transaction permanently. If this check is success, the transaction commits and enter into the committed state. If the check is failed, the transaction goes to failed state. If the transaction is aborted, while it's in active state, it goes to the failed state. It goes to the failed state, then the transaction should be rolled back to undo the changes or to undo the effect of its write operations on the database. So after this, it can go to the terminated state. The terminated state refers to the transaction leaving the system. So active means whenever you are at the beginning of the transaction, when you have performed read and write operations, if it completes its transaction, it goes to partially committed. You can end the transaction. Okay. If it is failed, it will go to the failed state. If it is successfully completed, it goes to the committed transaction. Then it will terminate from that. These are all the different states of transaction. Here are the definitions I have mentioned. Active state. A transaction enters into an active state when the execution process begins. During this state, read or write operations can be performed. What is partially committed? A transaction goes into the partially committed state after the end of transaction. Committed state. When the transaction is committed to state, it has already completed its execution successfully, and that has to be recorded in the database permanently. Failed state. A transaction considers failed when any one of the checks fails or if the transaction is aborted while it is in the active state. What is terminated state? State of transaction reaches terminated state when certain transactions which are leaving the restarted. These are the important states in the transaction. Next, we'll discuss about transaction processing system and its characteristics. An information system designed to process routine business transactions. So it should have seek time and cost efficiency by automating repetitive operations in large volumes. Example, airline reservation system, banks account processing system, library management system. These are all the example for transaction processing system. What are the important characteristics of TPS? So, large amounts of data are processed. The TPS processes information on a regular basis. That is, it can be daily, weekly, monthly, and so on. Large database capacity is required. That is, large storage capacity is required for TPS. High processing speed is needed due to high volume. We need high processing speed to perform any transactions. TPS basically monitors and collects past data. Input and output data are structured, that is standardized. A high level of accuracy, data integrity and security is needed when you are doing TPS. High reliability is also required. So what do you mean by TPS? Transaction processing systems are systems with large databases and hundreds of concurrent users that are executing database transactions. So it is supported by the programs that are called transaction processing system. So TPS provides three functional areas. One is system runtime functions, system administration functions, application development functions. What is system runtime functions? TPS provide an execution environment that ensures the integrity, availability and security of data. It also ensures fast response time and high transaction throughput. System administration functions means any administrative support provided to the users to configure, monitor and manage the transaction systems. Application development function. Transaction processing system provide functions for use in custom business applications, including functions to access data, to perform intercomputer communications and to design and manage the user interface. These are all the functional areas in the TPS. Next, we have single user versus multi-user system. As the name implies, DBMS is single user means if at most only one user at a time can use the system. Multi-user if many users can use the system, and hence it can access the database concurrently. Single user DBMS are restricted only for our personal computer systems, whereas in other DBMS are mostly multi-user system. Examples: airline reservation system is used by hundreds of travel agents and reservation clerks concurrently. We have database system used in banks, for example for multi-user system, insurance agencies, stock agencies, supermarkets and many other applications are multi-user system. In these multi-user systems, hundreds or thousands of users are typically operating on the database by submitting transactions concurrently to the system. What is concurrent transactions? So concurrent transaction, the concept of multiprogramming, which allows the computer to execute multiple programs or processes at the same time. If only a single CPU exists, it can actually execute at most one process at a time. However, multi-programming operating system execute some commands from one process, then suspend that process and execute some commands from the next process, and so on. Example, you have a multi-programming operating system and you are doing one execution process. Now you want to pause that work for a while. When you are pausing, at that moment the other system call will be executing simultaneously. And once you finish that task, you can come back to your resumed process where you have stopped, where it was suspended. Then the CPU will start using it again. So this process we call it as concurrent execution. So this process of executing simultaneously, we call it as interleaved processing. Okay, so concurrent execution of process is actually interleaved. Interleaved means keeps the CPU busy when a process requires an input or output operation. The CPU switched to execute another process rather than remaining idle during I/O time. We'll see the definitions here. What is single user? One user at a time can use the system. Multi-user, many users can use the system simultaneously. Interleaved processing, as I said, concurrent execution of process is interleaved in a single CPU. Parallel processing, processes are concurrently executed in multiple CPU. We'll see with one example. Consider here The two processes A and B are executing concurrently in an interleaved fashion. Okay, interleaving means keeps the CPU busy when a process requires an input or output operation, an IO operation. Okay, the CPU is switched to execute another process rather than remaining idle during IO time. So interleaving also prevents a long process from delaying other processes. If the computer system has multiple hardware processors, that is CPUs, parallelly it can process the multiple process if possible. So this example, this figure demonstrates an interleaved process versus parallel process. Here CPU, we have two CPUs, that is parallel processing. That means two or more processors are executing simultaneously. This side it shows two or more processors executing parallelly, that is parallel processing of concurrent transaction. And this example demonstrates interleaved processing, that is single processor executing one after the other. It doesn't make CPU goes idle. This is the concept of interleaved processing. So overall in this video we have discussed what is transaction, different states of transaction, Asst properties of transaction, characteristics of transaction, and the difference between single, multi-user, parallel processing system. Thank you for watching. Happy learning.